Hi everyone, Gary Shirk here, and today we're going to do another Puerto Vallarta real estate market update. As usual, I'm joined by my friend and colleague Nik Valcic of Shoreline Realty in Puerto Vallarta. Nik has been collecting a lot of stats for this year. He's drawn them all up into a report that is going to be available by just going to the description of this video and clicking on a link. So all of the information we're going to present today about the real estate market in Puerto Vallarta is going to be in that report, as well as a lot more information that he's really done quite a deep dive into the real estate market. Hi, Nik. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Gary. Great to be back with you on your channel and digging into the data. Us data geeks here.
Right. Yeah. This is definitely our folks who watch this video, and especially if they get your report, can go as far into the weeds as they'd like. So look, why don't you just go ahead and start us off with a high-level overview of what we're seeing here. By the way, this is May of 2025, and what are you seeing right now?
Well, as you mentioned a minute ago, I think it's important for folks who really want to get a deep dive into this to look at the full 2024 versus 2023 report, which, as Gary mentioned, is going to be in the link below, in the description below. So please link on that. That's a detailed report. It's quite lengthy, but it'll give you a good picture. What's important to know, and the reason why you want to go take a look at that, is because it's going to be quite a bit different than some of the numbers that we look through here, because 23, 24 were interesting years. 23 was post-COVID madness, everyone trying to figure out what was going on. And then, of course, 24, we had a big election happen. And it's tradition in PV, and actually throughout the States and even in Canada, that real estate sales kind of take a little bit of a step back during an election year. And that's just for regular election years. And this was an interesting one for sure. So what's really cool about this Q1 report here is what we're definitely seeing quite a bit of bounce back in the marketplace from a relatively, cooling off period in 23, 24. So we're back, which as I mentioned, is kind of normal for post-election. So I think the big picture is on the graph that you've put up here, Gary. The three things we're looking at here are the number of units sold, the dollar volume, and the average sales price. So let's dig into it real quick. The number of units sold were up 20%. The dollar volume were up 29%. And the average sales price were up around 7%. Now, this is for condos. For those of you guys who are into looking at data throughout Mexico, in particular Cabo, for my friend Fletcher Wheaton out there in Cabo, who also is a data geek and loves to do this, just a quick reminder, and he and I had a chat about this last week. The condo market in Cabo is around 30% of the total market, with houses and land making up the rest. Here in PV, we are about 80% of the market in condos, and houses and land making up the rest. So when we look at these numbers, we're really looking at condo sales, okay? Just as a quick caveat. So there, as you see on the chart here, all of our numbers are up.
So from your chart, Nik, I can see both prices and sales are up so far this year. What's driving the market right now?
Well, when we take a look at the price trends chart, what we see here is a nice big bump in February, March, okay? And folks need to know that it takes about 40 to 50 days for a home from the accepted offer to the close. So when we look at sales in February, really we're looking at is sales that were accepted offers in November and December and early January. So those all reflect the election's over and the world's going back to normal and everything is going to be fine, and people started buying. Now, of course, that was before February and this whole tariff thing happened. But an interesting thing on this graph to look at is the difference between the average price and the median price. Now, in the past, that gap was quite a bit smaller than the $100,000 gap that you're looking at here on this graph. The top line being the average and the lower line being the median. So what we're seeing there is more homes. It could be two things, but it's the first, which is more homes in the higher end hitting the marketplace versus the other thing that it could be, which is less homes in the lower end hitting the market. In this case here in PV, we have more homes on the higher end hitting the market, thus making the average a little higher versus the median than it has been in the past.
Okay, got it. So interesting that you could actually see in your data, a change after the U.S. election, and things started picking up at that point. Another interesting indicator to be aware of if you're following the market in Puerto Vallarta is the sales to list price ratio. So what's that doing these days?
Well, it's a great question, Gary, and I get this question a lot with our listing clients because, of course, this is a critical question that they all want to know. What should I list my property for? And then, of course, on the buyer's side, the question always becomes, well, how low can we go? And this is the graph that we usually show to both buyers and sellers to try and get a picture of where the marketplace is. Now, this graph that you've put up, it really shows a big difference. These numbers are coming down. Now, keep in mind, this is a graph of the ratio of what the home sold for versus what it was listed for. Now, there's two important lines on here. One is what it was sold for versus what the list price was at the moment when it was sold or at the moment when the offer was accepted. The second line is the sold price versus the original price when the home was listed. And for those folks that don't know, our average days on market here is over 200. So we have a nice big window here where the price can be adjusted over those 200 plus days, close to 300 actually. So as that home progresses through its life cycle, if you will, we usually see some price reduction. So it's a much better metric to take a look at that lower line that's on this graph. What's the sale price versus the original list price? And that gives us a much better understanding. When we first started on the top left-hand side of this graph, you can see we were close to 95% of the list price, of the original list price. And as time has progressed, we're seeing more of an erosion there. Now, that doesn't mean that this is turning into a buyer's market as it would in a marketplace where you have a 1 month, 2 month days on market. But it's certainly a trend that we can look at because it's very difficult, as you can appreciate, Gary, having done this for so long, to try and tell your clients, what's the market doing when the average days on market is 200 plus. So this is a metric that we look at that helps us crystal ball this a little bit.
Yeah, in your discussion there, you talked about the longer days on market that we experience here in Puerto Vallarta compared to what people are used to in their local markets in Canada and the US, for example. You want to just give us a little insight into why that is in our market?
Yeah, great question. And another one we get all the time. So there's a couple of important things to think about here. First of all, this isn't a marketplace where, for the most part, as an agent, I'm getting questions like, occasionally I do, but for the most part, it's not like, well, what are the local schools? What do the neighborhoods look like? What a drivability, walkability? We get those. But the point is that this is primarily a vacation and or investment marketplace, which means that you don't need to sell your current home right away to get out of that mortgage before you get into the next mortgage, which is definitely the case back home, whether that be Canada or the United States. So the vast majority, I mean, over 90, probably 99% of all of our deals here, they're done cash. So the owners that are selling, they're not sitting there going, I got to get out of this mortgage. The mortgage rates have changed. Oh my God, I can't carry this any longer. They're like, okay, well, my home's still making money. I'm still doing well. There's a great rental market in place, which I'm still enjoying. I still like coming down as a snowbird from Chicago or from Toronto or Edmonton and enjoying my vacation home for 3 to 6 months, let's say, and the rest of the time it's earning me money. So the sense of urgency from the seller just isn't there. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't care about selling their home, but it just takes quite a bit longer for anything to happen. And of course, on the buyer side, that's also true. Someone might come, take a look at the property and say, well, this looks good. Maybe we should come back in a month or 2 months or next season and see if it's still there. Chances are it might still be. But that's what drives this long days on market. And this is why we look more at the sale to list price ratio.
So that's interesting, Nick, and it actually leads me into my next question. What do you make of the increase that you've been seeing in listings this year? It's up quite a bit.
Yeah, that is correct. And the chart that you just put up here is pretty interesting. You can see we are at over 3,000 active listings, and you can see that line has gone up since November of last year. What's important to note here on this line, and the reason why there's such a huge difference between the new listings and the active listings goes back into what I was saying a few minutes ago, which is because there's so many days on market, you're going to see a lot of these listings in the top line that have been there for almost a year or a year. And what you can see is a bump in January of 2025. So if we look at the first 3 months of 2025, we're looking at a 50% increase in listings versus the same period last year. Now, mind you, it's only a 3-month period, but most of those happened in January. So that all happened post election. Okay, everything's calmed down. We're back in PV. Yeah, let's get our home listed. Prices are up. I don't think it's because folks are trying to get out of the market and take their money and run. I think they're interested in maybe looking at a larger property, taking some of those gains, that equity, and then maybe getting a place a little closer to the beach or a larger place or a nicer place, et cetera. But if you look at that lower line, again, to the right-hand side of the graph, you'll see that it comes back to a more normal range in March of this year. So it's back down to a reasonable amount. We've seen, a lot of folks just interested in, wow, look at these prices. They've gone up so much in the last couple of years. Let's take advantage of that and maybe upgrade and see if the market will bear what we're asking.
Yeah, and you mentioned that one reason to sell might be to change location to a different neighborhood. What neighborhoods are standing out now in 2025? What neighborhoods are buyers interested in these days?
Sure. Well, we're seeing the standard places continue to do well, and that is Centro North, where your place is, Gary. Folks recognize that by Romantic Zone or the Old Town. That consistently continues to do well, where we're looking at prices starting at $5,000 per square meter and going up from there. And what's driving that is continued occupancy rates. I mean, folks are coming here to vacation in droves, and that is driving occupancy rates up, and that that means a good investment for folks who are owners like you. The South Shore is doing really well. Again, the South Shore is everything south of Romantic Zone. And while there's quite a few condos there, single homes are very popular there. And that's where you're going to find the gorgeous multi-million-dollar beachfront, waterfront homes down there. We're also seeing some interest, quite a bit of interest in areas that traditionally weren't being looked at by expats and folks from Canada and the United States. Places like Pitial, places like the eastern side of Nuevo Vallarta or Nuevo Nayarit, where in the past those were either undeveloped or mostly local folks living there. Some of the new developments in those areas are looking very nice. They're high end, and they're definitely tailored to be in the 200, even 150 to $250,000 zone. These places are still close to the ocean, a 10-minute, 7-minute drive to the water, but maybe on the other side of the highway, and maybe not an area that folks traditionally would have looked at. But as we see with these much higher average condo prices, over $400,000, folks are looking for alternatives now in those areas. So those are two of the sort of areas that we're seeing growth in.
Okay. All right. I mean, in general, lots of options for people who are coming down to check out property, and the options are increasing. Okay. Well, how about question probably on a lot of people's minds? What do you see happening, especially in terms of price, going through the rest of 2025 into 2026? Prices have been rising pretty much sustainably at a steady rate. It's impossible to predict what's going to happen in the geopolitical realm, but give us your best shot at.
Sure. I mean, it's a tricky question. We all wish we had the crystal ball. Wish I'd bought Google stock at what year it was, whatever. But what we can look at is we can see that, for starters, there's no bubble here. Okay, and you have to have some definition of what a bubble means in order to be able to say that. And we knew what the bubble was in 2008, which is a lot of people investing in homes that they weren't going to use or weren't going to rent out or weren't going to live in, and they were using them specifically for speculation. And that was a bubble, and it went boom. We don't see that here. We see folks using their homes. We see them renting them out. We see them looking forward to retiring in these homes. We still have a decent population of baby boomers who are retiring over the next 3 to 5 years, even though quite a few have already. There's still a large section of that. And then the next generation also looking at investing in places outside of the United States. And then recently, we're seeing also Canadians who are decreasingly interested in investing in a vacation home or investment home in the United States, whether that be Palm Springs, Arizona, or Florida. Now, there's some geopolitical reasons for that, but there's also some legitimate reasons why you don't want to look at some of the insurance costs in Florida, some of the HOA increases in Florida, which are through the roof. So
property taxes are increasing too.
Absolutely. So it's not just all geopolitical. So we're seeing a lot of Canadian vacationers coming down here, which drives the rental market. So we see some good indicators in terms of maintaining the price. Now, I mentioned bubble before. If we look back to 2017, which you can see in the full report, which we made mention of earlier in this podcast, you can see this trend all the way from 2017, a nice gradual line. There's no big bumps in either direction. And I don't anticipate that changing over the next 2 years. So I see a nice, solid, steady demand. some increased demand from Canadian renters and investors, and a good demographic still backing up the potential for increases in this marketplace here. And then also, if you drive in either direction from the airport, you're still going to see construction cranes in either direction. So the finance companies that are financing these construction projects are still doing so. The developers are still going to the finance companies, and there's or self-financing. There's a lot of construction going on.
Okay, so finally, Nik, what advice would you give to someone who's thinking about potentially purchasing in Mexico and specifically in Puerto Vallarta?
Well, I mean, basically, I think I sort of answered that with the last question. We're seeing a lot of interest here from all of those reasons, the demographics and the geopolitical stuff. The other side of PV, which is really doing well, is that Puerto Vallarta has an MLS and a very strong real estate board, which is called AMPI here, and it's the Real Estate Board of Mexico. And that means that when you or I are talking to clients, we can get this data that you see in this report and the data that you see in my full report. That's all provided to us as agents through AMPI. And it makes a huge difference. If you go to Tulum or some of these other spots, you're relying on that agent's knowledge of the marketplace to tell you what's going on. And that's a very difficult thing to try and figure out. It's going to be very difficult to take a look at what pre-construction versus actual construction is, and we have all that data. How things are doing, what the average price per square meter is, how many one bedrooms were sold versus 2 bedrooms. All of that data is available here. But more importantly, AMPI vets all of these listings. So when someone comes to me with a listing, I'm the one who does all the title search and does all of that research. Once I get it and it looks good to my team and our lawyers, it then goes to AMPI and they review it. That just doesn't happen in Cancun or Tulum or Riviera Maya. You have to rely on your agent. And that's a big thing when you're buying something maybe for the first time and you're coming from Chicago or you're coming from Seattle or Vancouver. That does make a difference. So I see the demand remaining high for that reason, for the demographic reason, and also, lastly, for the reason that PV is different than those other two major centers from the art scene perspective, from the gastronomy scene. The foodie network here is huge, and the art scene is huge. I mean, the artists and theater scene is huge here. So the number of shows per week, the quality of shows has gone up over the last couple of years. I mean, there is no shortage of any of that. And the walkability score, if you will, as you know, Gary, you can be at your condo and you can grab a couple of shopping bags or a cart or whatever, and you can go shopping and you can take an Uber back, and it's only a couple blocks. Try doing that in Cabo. It's not a place where you do that sort of stuff. So there's a big difference in just the whole scene here in PV, which folks really like. Yeah. So it's hard to tell, of course, but all of those factors, the last thing I'll leave you with is, hey, if you'd bought 2 years ago here, chances are you'd be looking at doubling what your property is worth, depending on which neighborhood you bought.
Yeah, a lot of good reasons to consider Puerto Vallarta. I think it's one of the most unique and most fun and best cities on the planet, not just Mexico. Well, Nik, I want to thank you. Again, I want to reiterate all of the data we talked about here today and a lot more is available for free. Just take a look at the link in the description. My contact information and Nik's contact information will be there. If anybody has any questions, one of us would be happy to talk with you anytime. Nik, any final words before we sign off?
Now, I just want to say thanks again, Gary, for this. We're going to do quite a few more of these, folks, so be ready. As Gary mentioned, on our website, shorelinerealtypv.com, you'll be able to find a variety of other topics on our blog post, links to all of this data, links to how to get your residency and why it's important to get that sooner rather than later. All these kinds of topics that folks are interested in, you can find it all there. And look forward to our next meeting. Gary, thanks.
Okay, Nick, thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.